I've studied the plan and I have a series of questions and comments. The plan suggests that all interest income for the city's from the city's long-term investment monies have been included in the funding model at an annualized rate of return forecast at 4%. Am I correct that all interest income over the next 10 years has been included in the funding model? What is the current rate of interest realized by the city on its existing investment funds, i.e. 2013 ROI? What assumptions have been made to determine the future year investment earning potential for the city's reserve funds? And has a bad debt allowance been taken for LEC? The plan projects total spending of $208.9 million over the period 2014 through 2023, and $94.8 million of that $208.9 million will be spent in 2014 alone. The plan admits that there is a funding shortfall of $18.8 million over 10 years. The plan is unclear as to what year the funding shortfall will arise. A brief analysis says that $208.9 million less $18.8 million shortfall leaves you with $190.1 million of actual money that you've got. If you divide that in half, you end up with $95.05 million. So basically, council is planning to spend in 2014, 50% of all of its available spending capacity in 1 year, leaving the remaining 9 years to spend the other half. It's essentially front-end loading its expenditures. To commit 50% of the next 10 years' income to year one is, in my opinion, foolish. Council's course essentially leaves each future council with little or no spending flexibility beyond essentials, because to alter course at a later date will potentially result in thrown away value for investments planned and made by this council in the 2014 period. The city will be required to survive on the remaining 50% of known and available income, potentially for the next 9 years, through at least 3 separate council terms. LEC. How much of the $12 million earmarked for 2014 has already been spent in 2013 fiscal period without staff actually coming before council for spending authority? My understanding is that the city is performing work on behalf of LEC, issuing invoices to LEC for this work, and LEC is unable to pay these invoices. Is this correct? My understanding is that the city is contemplating turning these non-performing LEC receivables into long-term debt obligations or loans. Is this correct? I'm told that the city is considering the potential of converting LEC debt into a share acquisition, which would essentially turn the non-performing long-term loans and non-performing short-term receivables into a non-interest-bearing investment in LEC shares. Is this correct? Opinion. With all due respect, this idea is folly. When you already own 100% of a thing, and then dilute the share pool so you can buy more, your aim must be to camouflage the fact that the loans, short-term receivables, are non-performing, and your real objective is to relieve the debtor of an obligation to pay interests on monies borrowed. When you have a problem creditor, which entity is unable to pay its obligations, you do not cure the problem by giving the creditor more money. You limit or curtail credit, and you develop and implement a strategy to reduce exposure and recover your investment. What are you thinking? Have you consulted with or engaged an arm's length third party to help you review the debt recovery options associated with the city's non-performing exposure to LEC and all available avenues to recover the taxpayers' money? Why are you committing 12.66% of the city's available 2014 budget resources to further investment in a non-core asset when all the existing LEC loans and receivables are already essentially bad debt?
So, Mr. Morris, what I'm going to do is I think you've got more to go, and we've done the 5 minutes. I don't think there's other people in the gallery, so there is Mr. Pringle. So, Mr. Pringle, I hope you know I'm going to indulge. I'm going to let Mr. Morris do the second 5 minutes now, because I think we usually allow twice. So if we carry on, and then I'll go to you, Mr. Pringle. I apologize. So, Mr. Morris, another 5 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you. Further question is, why are you withholding from taxpayers full and complete access to the financials by conducting LEC matters exclusively during in-camera sessions beyond our ability to make inquiry? On other points, if you canvass the vast majority of residents regarding the single largest impact currently affecting their quality of life as a resident of the City of North Vancouver, the issue which is most predominantly disclosed is vehicle traffic. I would note that Councillor Clark mentioned that himself tonight before we began. Traffic on Marine Drive, Keith Road, Lonsdale, Highway 1, Main Street, Mountain Highway, Lynn Valley Road, Low Level Road, 1st and 3rd Streets, 1st and 2nd Narrows Bridges. We are all frustrated with the lack of transportation planning. I note that the city's population forecast in 2013 is almost equal to the 2033 population plan previously forecast. We're now 20 years ahead of our population growth plan. I also note the 2014 through 23 plan has no transportation planning monies until 2016, 5 years, and no meaningful amount until 2018, 5 years out. Why is transportation planning receiving such a low priority by this council when it is such a large issue for city residents? We have potable water pipe in the ground that was put there in 1913, 100 years ago. We have freshwater pipe leaking at 17th and Grand Boulevard as we speak, and have had for over a week. Yet no one has taken steps to fix this water leak. The city's current solution is to dump a pile of salt on it so that it won't freeze and cause a motor vehicle accident. Where is the budget in these capital monies to replace this essential potable water delivery system? Do we have a long-term replacement plan for the potable water system? Where is it? And how much will it cost? And how is the water system replacement to be funded? The single largest capital project on the horizon for city residents is the new wastewater treatment facility to replace the existing Lions Gate facility. The proposed plan does not allocate monies to the wastewater treatment replacement project. Why? How do you intend to fund this project? Are you forecasting a new tax or a levy outside the proposed funding plan? Harry Jerome. It's my understanding that the $8 million in the plan for Harry Jerome is a placekeeping funding allocation. But the plan also says that the 2014 funds are expected to be spent in 2014, which is at odds with the placekeeping concept. How much of the $8 million will be spent for planning purposes in 2014, and when will approval for this expenditure be sought? At FC Attachment 2, at page 3, it appears in the city intends to drain 10 of 22 reserve funds to zero value, or $1, and reduce the balance in most other reserves substantially. Overall, city reserve funds will drop by 50% in 1 year. To appropriate and or consume 50% of all the city's reserve funds for planned use in a single fiscal year is inappropriate conduct by any council at any time. If you flip over the page, you will see where the numbers come from. They're out of your budget. The opening balance, PTA, which is projected total available, which includes the monies that will come in 2014. Those are the opening balances from the report, the closing balances, and the difference. And it is a net reduction of 50%. And as I said, 10 of the accounts will drop to $0 or $1. The 2014 plan has a total allocation of $5.6 million, of which only $1.337 million has been allocated to paving. That's the streets and transportation budget. Previously, we were told by Mr. Tolston that utilities did not pay the cost of road repairs when disturbing city streets and infrastructure. You'll note 2 pages back, thank you to the BC Utility Commission, you have the funding agreement for the city with BC Gas.
So your time is up, Mr. Morris. I'm going to thank you for that, and I'm going to have staff come up, and we're going to go through this item by item and respond to them as best we can this evening. So, Ms. Gordon, I think you're taking the seat here first, and feel free to ask other members. I think the engineering is here, and staff, so thank you. Welcome.
So, Your Worship, I'll do my best to go through these. In some cases, I may have to seek some
Certainly.
help from staff. The first question that Mr. Morris raised relates to the interest income in the investments. We are using an annualized rate of return of 4%. I think one comment to make here is that the city's plan is not funded just by interest. This is for the interest on our tax sale land fund. The city also has a transfer from taxes, which is over 11% of taxes, so that the city's capital plan is basically funded on an annuity basis. The capital plan also includes $34 million, which is the city's amenity money. And that is money that the city has realized from the sale of land, and that is certainly a one-time source of funds and can only be expended once. But the rest of the plan, the basic infrastructure plan, is paid for from the interest and the transfer for taxes, and that comes each and every year. So in the case, there's a later question about reducing some of these reserves to zero. There is a concern with whether the city is investing enough in infrastructure, and there will be future reports to council on asset management. But right now, the city is basically investing 100% of those reserves amounts each year into infrastructure. So, but each year there is another amount which comes from the taxes. So, although it appears that they're going, it's a sum of money that's like, it's not really a savings account, it's more like an annuity which comes every year. And hopefully that will explain why some of those reserves are shown as going to zero. Am I correct that all interest income over the next 10 years has been included in this funding model? All interest income related to the reserve investments is included in the funding model. And as I said, we're showing it at 4% per year. The current rate of interest realized by the city on its existing funds, its existing pool of investments, is around 4.23. We're not showing it quite as high as that over the 10-year span, because we are finding that as our longer-term investments mature, we are not able to obtain those rates. However, over a 10-year span, rates may certainly turn around again. They are being projected. We are using the bond yield curve to reflect what we think will happen with the investment pool. And that, I think, addresses the question about assumptions in determining future year investment earning potential. Has a bad debt allowance been taken for LEC? No, it has not. I think I should mention that I had a conversation with Mr. Timmons this morning, and a report specifically focusing on LEC and its financial relationship with the city will be forthcoming before the end of the year to council, offering some options for changing that relationship if council wishes to do so. The figures that Mr. Morris quotes, the $94.8 million and the $2.8 million over 10 years, are correct, but it should be noted that the amenity funding, which is $34 million, we put that in every year because council may wish to spend it. If they don't necessarily, are not necessarily going to go forward to spend it, but we make it 100% available. Because if we do not put that into the project plan, if council did wish to spend it, it would not be available. So those are provisions. Similarly, there's an amount of $12 million which is allocated to LEC. That is a provision. It's only there if council wishes to spend it. And it's unlikely that that amount of money would be spent. but it will offer council some options, which will be discussed when the report on LEC comes forward. There is a funding shortfall in the current plan. That is because the projected needs, as I said, the infrastructure needs do exceed the projected amounts of funding that are available. Each year, in the first year of the plan, we make sure that the plan is balanced. We go through the process that we've just been through, where council ranks projects and fits within the funding envelope that we have. But we did not want to do that over the 10 years of the plan because we do not want to underestimate the future requirements. We want to make council aware that those future requirements do exist, so that we will have to look in future years at rebalancing our priorities in terms of investment. And the next couple of pages are comments. Comments about LEC I think will be addressed in the report of Mr. Timmons, so I really can't speak to them now. In terms of transportation, this council has indicated that they wish to use the city's available transportation funds in over several priorities, including traffic calming, creation of bicycle paths, and so on, and other alternate forms of transportation. The city does have a transportation plan. That transportation plan actually gives priority to other forms of transportation than vehicle transportation. Vehicle transportation is in the plan, but it's not the number one thing that's in the plan. And that plan is endorsed by council, and that is what staff are following, and that has resulted in the allocation of funds that is in the current plan. So that's a policy direction from council, and if council wishes to change that, then they certainly can do so. But this reflects the city's current transportation plan, and I think Mr. Pope could speak to that more if you wish. In terms of the traffic on specific roads, I think Mr. Pope could speak to that. I don't think it's correct to say that there's a lack of transportation planning in the city. As I say, there is an endorsed plan which is available to the public. In terms of water, the questions that were raised with water, all water projects are funded through the Water Fund. There is a meeting scheduled for, I believe, the 2nd of December, which is a Finance Committee meeting specifically to discuss the utilities, of which the water utility would be the first one being discussed. And there is a program in place for replacement, which is fully funded through the rates that are charged in the water utility. So this is not in the project plan that we have before you tonight because we put it in the utility plan. When the entire plan is put together, of course, all of the projects appear. But there's nothing specific about the water provided to tonight's meeting because it will be discussed on December 2nd. And there will be a full list of water projects included in those materials. We do, of course, have a long-term replacement plan, and in the case of the water system, we feel that our funding projections are reasonable and it is fully funded. In terms of the particular pipe leaking at 17th and Grand Boulevard, Mr. Pope possibly could speak to that. The wastewater treatment facility will be funded through the city's sewer fund. There will be a discussion of options for council if council wishes. There certainly are some projections out there of increasing costs, but it is not clear at this time, I would say. I mean, I think there's a cost allocation meeting still taking place. Those meetings are still taking place at Metro, and there is another factor which is in play, which is the contribution of senior governments. So it's, and the overall cost for the plant are not totally established at this point. So it is possible for council to build into their current rate to begin setting aside funding, because we know that in fact the rates will certainly rise from what they are now in order to fund that plant. But that's a decision that council has to make. So that's an option for council. It's not presented tonight. It would be presented on the 2nd of December. And in any case, that would be built into the rate that is charged by the sewer fund. So there is no plan that I'm aware of for a new tax or levy, but the funding for that plant will have to be built into the current sewer utility payment that is being made by the individual households. In terms of Harry Jerome, the $8 million that is in place is a placekeeping funding allocation. I've certainly described it that way myself, but indeed, again, just as all the amenity money is in place, the $8 million is in place if council wishes to expend it, and I think there's a motion later on tonight's agenda to speak about possibly moving that forward. And so some of that money council may wish to authorize for expenditure. Other than that, I think it's useful to have that council have directed that fund be dedicated to that project, so it's useful to show it in the plan as dedicated to the project. And indeed, it is available if council wishes to expend the entire amount. I'm not sure what it would be spent on this year, but it's possible that there's things that could be done on Harry Jerome which would require some of that funding. But approval for specific expenditure would definitely be sought. So this, having it in the plan, simply freezes the money to the project. Any expenditure would be the subject of a second report. I've spoken to the fact that some of the reserves are actually on an annuity basis. Each year they're replenished, each year the funds are expended, and that I think explains why you're seeing zero values. It's like a payment that's received each year. And that is the way the city has operated for the last 25 years that I have been working in finance here. So I think it's a system that actually works quite well. Again, the allocation to paving is as a result of the transportation plan that the city has. And the rest, the questions here relating to road repairs and terrace and gas reimbursing the city. I think there's been some misunderstanding. Of course, all utilities who cut into the streets are repairing the street to the point where the street can then be reused. I mean, no one is leaving a giant hole in the street. That is not happening. What we were trying to explain, and this has to do with long-term funding of infrastructure, is that each time the integrity of the pavement is breached, it impairs the useful life of the street. And that is not being compensated for. So by Terracin or by any of the other utilities that are cutting it, and there are many who cut into the street right away, and that is what we were trying to explain. So I believe that, I believe that speaks to all the questions, and if council would like specific information on transportation or on a specific water pipe project, Mr. Pope could speak to that.
Thank you very much. I think when I'll go, and just out of fairness, I think Mr. Timmons, did you have comments to make at all, or were you going to wait for that report? Are you able to comment at all? Or
No, like Ms. Gordon said, I'm preparing a report for a few weeks, and I can address the questions then.
If you don't mind, if you could address the question.
Unless council wants answers now, I can defer that to that time.
So I think we need a good report addressing these issues.
Yes, I think
We'll
it should
make sure
be
that's public.
holistic. Yeah.
Thank you. And then I'm going to go to Mr. Pope. Mr. Pope, are you able to respond to some of these questions in this?
Certainly, Your Worship. I think Ms. Gordon responded to the majority of the ones, so unless council wants some more detail, I could provide. But the only other one that I noticed that I should respond to is the water leak at 17th and Grand Boulevard. I'm not personally aware of that water leak that was spoken of. However, I am aware that our waterworks crew are actually going to be on that site tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. doing scheduled water valve replacements. So I can anticipate if there is a leak there, and it is the responsibility of the city, that it will be addressed tomorrow at that time, Your Worship.
Just as an addition, Mr. Pope, I noticed that leak 10 days ago, so I emailed Mr. Mahood. He emailed me back right away saying that they are aware of it, it's old, and they had equipment on order. And so it's been on order. They're going to replace all 4 valves, not just the one, but they're going to go in and replace all 4 valves. And so I think they were waiting until the equipment was delivered. We don't have that kind of equipment in stock. And it's good to hear that tomorrow morning they're going to be dealing with that.
Yes, Your Worship.
So I believe we've tried to cover some of the questions for Mr. Morris. I think with the reports from Mr. Timmons coming in 2 weeks. Mr. Pope, if you're able to also go through these, if you think there's something else you'd like to add, because I think there are some questions here for transportation that I think that we need to probably address as well more thoroughly. Might be more difficult tonight. There are some questions here. I think that maybe we should make sure if we could follow up either through Finance Committee or through yourself.
Yes, Your Worship.
Okay, so thank you very much for that. Hopefully that addresses some of Mr. Morse's issues.